No, I just was looking, maybe there's one hidden somewhere, make it easier. Now, compressor stations and processing plants were moved to the business district that allows industrial uses as a conditional use.
Yes.
Can you just read that one more time? Just wondering where you might get, I'm sorry. I just
That's
lost
okay.
it completely.
Do you need to take a break?
It's been a little while.
If that's okay with the board?
If you could just read it
She's
one
ready.
more time, I just didn't catch it, please.
Okay, and I'm reading from the document. It says, as permanent industrial facilities, compressor stations and processing plants are moved to the B business district that allows industrial uses as a conditional use.
Yes.
So that's what happened. They're not in the rural residential district.
That's correct.
And it says permanent industrial facilities. Is there something less permanent, or do you recall what the council think, or was there discussion about less permanency of oil and gas wells?
Excuse me. I'm okay with one characterization of that question and not the other. What they thought is objectionable.
Okay, that's fine.
There were discussions about compressor stations and similar uses being permanent, long-term industrial uses versus conventional wells being temporary industrial uses.
Was there a time period discussed about what was temporary about the industrial use of the drill site?
I think generally it was viewed as the development of the well pad and the fracking of the well was viewed as industrial short-term.
And once the well is in operation, does it revert back to residential?
I wouldn't define it as residential, I define it as a use.
Well, am I correct, in your ordinance, you define uses as commercial, residential, industrial?
You have gas wells all through this community in residential districts.
Unconventional?
Not unconventional, no.
I'm speaking about unconventional.
Okay,
Okay, have you ever been to an unconventional gas site?
yes.
And are there features left on the site that can retain their industrial use?
No different than what is left after a conventional well.
Is the footprint bigger?
Can be.
Have you ever seen one that isn't?
Haven't seen what.
An unconventional well site that isn't bigger than a conventional well site?
Have I ever seen an unconventional well site that's bigger than,
That isn't bigger than a conventional well site?
depends on what you say the well site is. What's left? There's a Christmas tree left, there's a tank left
Is there truck traffic that has to access the site?
on a conventional well?
On both?
Yes.
Are there any emissions that come off the unconventional well after it's in production?
I would suppose, yes.
Jack, we didn't offer Mr. Morrison as a witness on his knowledge of the industry. He's here to say what he did to present to the legislators. His knowledge of the industry really isn't what was the basis of the legislation. So I'm gonna limit, not that he obviously knows about it, but it's not relevant. If he wants to ask, was information presented to council on that, because Mr. Morrison didn't vote.
Well, what I'm asking about is the document that's been submitted by council in evidence in Exhibit 4, where Mr. Morrison testified that he authored, where he says, as a permanent industrial facilities, then determination of land use category for oil and gas, where industrial use versus industrial aspects associated with construction site, temporary versus permanent. So that, I was just expounding upon what he meant, or what he wrote in this exhibit.
Again, he's comparing conventional, which are permitted in all of these districts, to the extent that he's getting into what conventional wells are. I don't know if that's part of the challenge, but
It isn't.
the only testimony is what, you can ask what component of that, in his opinion, is industrial or not. But, getting into comparison of the conventional well, that's not additionally part of the challenge, where conventional wells were drilled.
And I agree, and I think Mr. Morrison is the one who started to get into conventional, and I started to try to deal with that in terms of comparing it to unconventional.
Well,
I don't care about
I should have objected maybe earlier,
decided the board does not consider Mr. Morrison to be an expert on conventional and unconventional wells. So they're going to apply whatever weight they deem appropriate when reviewing this entire matter. But the board would simply recommend that Mr. Morrison, if he knows the answer, answer, and if he doesn't, he should say so.
Yeah, and all I'm trying to establish, is I'm not pulling these out of thin air, is just asking questions about the report he offered. So that's, I'll try to limit. Looking at, if you look at the next page, Mr. Morrison. Here, again, your historical outline of what happened, balancing tests included cost benefit to the community as a whole, compatibility of land uses within the overlay district, and establishes areas of least compatibility issues with neighboring property owners. Is that what we talked about already, the least amount of compatibility issues with neighboring property owners, meaning the least amount of people?
Yes, that's part of it.
Now, you indicate here that a review of court decisions to date of the development of the draft ordinances, including the pain test, review of the Rural Environmental Rights Amendment. You see that?
Yes.
Since this has been authored, have you ever been made aware that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has overruled the pain test?
Yes.
Has Murrysville ever gone back and looked at its ordinance again in recognition that the pain test is no longer applicable?
Not in any detail.
Is the ordinance the same since you authored this document that when you utilize the pain test?
Yes. D-A-Y-N-E.
Just one.
No, it's a proper name.
If you look at the education sessions, and we talked about, a little bit about this, and I'm not looking to belabor it, but here, you identify the third session, which we spoke at some length, was conducted by professors and researchers from the University of Pittsburgh and West Virginia University with expertise in natural gas drilling and public health. They provided findings from their research on potential public health impacts of natural gas drilling. You see that?
Yes.
Now, does that help refresh your memory that they provided the findings that I read to you earlier?
There was a general discussion of their research.
And do you recall their testimony to council that setbacks were inadequate?
No, I did not.
If you flip to, the next page is entitled Revisions to the Ordinance. If you go to the page after that. It looks as though, on the top there, that one of the least recommendations was to maintain the current combined 800-foot setback from the edge of the drill pad. Next page, I believe.
Yeah, I'm just looking, prior sentence, yes.
Okay, and was that recommended by the task force?
That is where we were at that point in time.
Do you know whether that was based upon considerations of public health?
I don't know what council was considering on their own.
Do you recall what was before council? Were they debating whether 800 was sufficient for protection of public health?
They were considering all of the options and deciding.
Do you have any recollection as to why it ultimately went down to 750?
No,
Do you recall that it was based purely on feasibility of more drilling?
I don't follow that question at all.
The reduction from 800 feet recommended to 750 feet in the ordinance was based on the idea that it would provide for more locations for drilling.
I'm going to object. The witness indicated he didn't know what the basis for the change was. Now he's being asked that question again.
Sustain that.
Now, if you look at the next bullet point, you wrote this, you said, given the concern over benzene pollutants generated by diesel engines, consider increasing the setback from the edge of the well pads to schools, daycare centers, and assisted care facilities due to the stationary nature of those uses. Do you recall when you wrote this, where did you get the idea that there was concerns over benzene pollutants?
It was brought up at one of the public sessions.
Do you recall who brought that up?
brought up by the professors from Pitt and WVU.
Okay. And do you know why benzene is problematic?
It's carcinogenic.
Do you know how far benzene would flow from an emission standpoint from a drill site?
Objection.
Let me rephrase the question, I'll withdraw that. Did council ever have in its possession, to the best of your knowledge, any information about how far benzene would travel from a drill site to potential property owners?
No, I don't.
Do you recall council ever engaging anyone to do any sort of air studies?
No.
Do you know why, or where you came up with the information that there was a concern about increasing the setbacks near these schools and daycare centers?
Say it again, please.
You wrote this bullet point, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where you got the information from that there was some consideration about increasing the setbacks from drill sites to daycare centers, assisted care facilities, and I think schools?
I believe I already answered that.
That's from the same people,
That's correct.
the UPMC in West Virginia?
Yes.
Now, if you turn the page, Mr. Morrison. Again, your historical text of what happened. In part, it says, remove provisions from the ordinance relating to the Environmental Rights Amendment. And best management practices relied upon the environmental community impact statement as currently required by the Murrysville Charter and Saldo.
Yes.
Was there a draft with the Environmental Rights Amendment in the language? I'm not sure where you're removing it from.
I believe the environmental rights language is still in there.
So what was this referring to?
This is referring to specific studies, whether they were hydrology studies, air studies, traffic studies. Those are all identified in the subdivision and land development ordinance.
Now, on this map section, and I'm not gonna take you through every map, but would these have been maps and documents that the council would have had prior to making its decision to enact the ordinance?
Yes.
Would they have had any other types of maps, or would this have been it?
I believe these are it.
In these map section, is there any provisions that provide for or discuss the public health relative to the buffer zones?
I think that as part of the process, the health was always foremost in evaluating the setback.
And my question was, in these particular maps, is there any reference to public health?
No.
Do you know whether or not, prior to enacting the ordinance, that council engaged any industrial hygienists?
No, I don't.
Do you know whether council consulted with or engaged any toxicology experts?
No, I don't.
Do you know whether council looked at the chemicals that are associated with oil and gas activities other than benzene?
Do I know whether they did or not?
In any of the hearings you were involved in?
Ask the question again, please.
Let me see if I can ask a better question. You testified in your, at least in your document, that there was some discussion and concern about benzene, correct?
I believe yes, as part of that one public session.
Okay. Were there any other chemicals that council looked at to consider their potential health effect on residents?
Objection. I think he has to say that he's aware we're presented. Council could have been reading anything on its own.
Well, that were presented at the hearing.
At that hearing, no, that I'm aware of.
Do you know whether council ever did any air modeling to see how far certain chemicals would travel prior to setting their setbacks?
I was asking an answer.
And one of the, if you need the document, I can dig up, but one of the documents, it indicated there was gonna be an ongoing dialogue with adjoining municipalities. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And was that dialogue relative to, where drilling would occur in those municipalities?
No.
Okay. Why was there comments about dialogue with the other municipalities? Was it just as to what they were doing from a regulation standpoint?
Experiences, yes.
Did you ever become aware, or do you know whether the council became aware that the oil and gas operators can operate in other municipalities and drill into Murrysville, under Murrysville?
Yes.
Did you contemplate, or did council contemplate that in looking at the land mass available for drilling?
I believe there were discussions concerning that.
I was gonna get into the ordinance. You wanna